Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabi Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like fortune, fallibility, fanfare, and fury.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today, we're going to talk about fate, what it means to us, and whether it's actually a legitimate phenomenon or just a nice idea.
Joe, do you believe in fate?
Yes, and ... I would say that I do believe that there is a certain amount of preordained stuff about life, but I also believe that human beings have a tremendous amount of control in terms of influencing the outcome. So does that answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it does. I totally get it. And I have to say, I kind of, when I started thinking about this concept, especially when I started researching it for this episode, I really agreed with you. And I have to tell you, I thought this was going to be a light episode where we talked about, moments of fate, coincidences that were just too crazy to be true. And, the idea that things could be preordained or, that they just happen coincidentally. And it turns out there's a crazy amount of neuroscience research on the concept of fate. Did you know that? Have you ever heard anything about it?
I did not know that.
Okay.
No. And what's interesting about it is I thought you were going to go in a completely different direction and talk about sort of religious stuff, right? Like if you believe in God and God had, but that's not what you're saying at all. So I'm really fascinated.
No, I mean, so you brought up religion. So it's interesting. There is this, so this is a good place to start. There's this Judeo-Christian concept that's known as moral liberty, which is the capacity to discern and pursue the good instead of being merely compelled by appetites and desires, right? So this idea of basically the question of fate, from what I saw everywhere I read, comes down to the question is, it's not so much does fate exist? It's more, does free will, is there really such a thing as free will? Are we really as in control as we thought we are? And what's crazy is certainly the whole Judeo-Christian tradition, everything that's based on the Old Testament and many other religions, are based on this idea that we can choose to do the right thing, right? And that's what our entire culture purports to be what we're basing our government on. And obviously we don't always all agree on what exactly is the right thing. And that's where democracy comes into play. But there's this idea that every individual human...
Oh, yeah. We used to have a Supreme Court that was independent, I think. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
not that that's weighing on our minds right now or anything. So there's this idea that, and we all, those of us who buy into the society that we live in have this idea that every individual human, and certainly our legal system, is based on this idea that we all individually have the ability to choose right versus wrong, or, that there is some sort of generally collective idea of right versus wrong, and that we all at any moment have the ability to decide what it is we're going to do. But it turns out, so there's this whole, I had no idea that this research was going to go in this direction, like I said. So there's an American...
I love when that happens.
Me too. There's this American physiologist named Benjamin LeBay. And in the 1980s, he demonstrated that his hypothesis that we have no free will. So it was already known that electrical activity builds up in a person's brain before he or she, for example, moves their hand, takes a step. And he showed that the buildup occurs before a person makes any decision to move. And he sort of used that to prove that the conscious experience of deciding to act is a post hoc reconstruction of events that occurs after the brain has already set the act into motion. And so his theory that a lot of people agreed with is that our brains have already decided everything that we're going to do. Now, I initially sort of reject this idea, but I think it's very possible that that's because I have bought into this idea that I'm in control of everything I do at every time. But we know from tons of research into how, let's say, for example, advertising works, that there are controls beyond our awareness that are making our decisions for us.
Well, certainly manipulating us.
Yeah. So I'm really, I guess I have a lot, I can tell you about more of the research, but I'll say for now, like I really am at kind of a loss. I'm not sure where I stand on this. So I don't know. What do you think?
So I think many things. So I think that in order to feel our own agency, which I think is a basic human desire or motivation, we need to feel like we have some control over what happens to us. Absolutely. We do make conscious choices. That doesn't mean we are always making conscious choices. I think frequently we're making unconscious choices. We are influenced by all sorts of things, from our upbringing to our genetic makeup to the messages that bombard us to, the society that we live in. What is on trend certainly impacts all of us. Just look at what we eat and how different what we eat this year is from what we ate 5 years ago, and just all of that. I also I have a lot of respect for this idea that I know is in Judaism. It very well may be in other religions as well, of the evil inclination and the good inclination. And so in Hebrew, it's called Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, sort of this pull to do good, which I absolutely feel in my heart and have throughout my life. And equally strong is an inclination to do bad and to be, for instance, greedy, to like the impulse to take what's not mine, the impulse to speak ill of other people. And it's a constant battle to control these two urges or inclinations. So how does fate play into that?
I was thinking about that idea as well. And what I couldn't help thinking about was, in traditional theater kid mode, I was thinking about Les Miserables, and which strove to really introduce the idea that the idea of, there were lots of things in Les Mis, but lots of concepts. But when you think about, are you familiar with Les Miserables, the show? So
yes, I am.
Jean Valjean steals this loaf of bread, goes to prison for years, reforms himself, and comes out this pillar of society. But there's a lot of attention paid to the fact that he's treated like this dirty, bad criminal when he was just trying to feed his family, right? And I remember when I was very young, that helped me sort of see the way that people who didn't have the resources that others might have, how their lives may tend to go. And so I think about this idea of like my drive to do good, my drive to do evil, my I don't know if I would say I have a drive to do evil, but like choosing quote unquote the right thing versus maybe not being so honest or whatever it is. And I often gossiping, sure. I often think of myself as having, now don't get me wrong, like all the resources in the world don't keep me from indulging in a little bit of gossip. But that said, I have the resources. I don't have to steal bread or, figurative bread, literal or figurative bread. I have the option. It's easier for me to make the quote unquote right choice than I think it might be for somebody else. And certainly the way our legal system is set up does not take that into consideration, because in a lot of ways, people who start it, I've always been bothered by this idea that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because
you can.
I can, sure. It's a nice idea, but I have good bootstraps, and good calf strength or whatever it is that you need because of a lifetime of being supported. And I don't have to pull myself up by my own bootstraps because I don't know, if handrails, I'm sort of losing it with this metaphor, but like, you know what I mean?
And then there's a little white privilege. You got a little white privilege mixed in. I mean, I don't, right? So I don't think you grew up in an environment where people were violent toward one another, or they showed love in ways that was potentially harmful, or neglected children, for instance, or and on and on and on.
I have lowercase T trauma, but no uppercase, no big T trauma, and my little T trauma is pretty average and standard. And so someone with a different background from me might have a much more difficult time. And, that's what we see. That's why we see a lot more crime in communities with fewer resources. We also see all kinds of crime in communities with lots of resources, but it's not really the same. So I think about that a lot. I think about how, we all have this inside of us, and it's a nice thing to pay attention to. But also when you think about society in general, just relying, really we're getting into like Republican ideals versus Democratic ideals, at least as they first began. It's the power of individualism, rugged individualism, versus the importance of working together.
The collective.
Right? Yes, exactly. So.
Right. Public health, for instance, and this is, we've discussed mask wearing and who are you doing it for? And, all of that, vaccinations, and it goes on and on. It's interesting. I, as you know, have written, now I can say have written rather than am writing a memoir. And so this issue comes up a lot in terms of what happens to us that we really don't have any control over. For instance, in the case of my book, it opens on a scene where I am literally walking across the street in a crosswalk, having looked both ways, and a car stops for me. And just as I am directly in front of that car, a truck comes at full speed, smashes into that car, which smashes into me. I go flying up in the air, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So was that fate that this would happen to me? I don't think I made any choices. Well, obviously I did make a choice to walk across the street at that moment, but thinking back on it, it wasn't a poor choice. It was a very measured choice. Mm-hmm. I was not distracted at the time, although I am often distracted. I wasn't on the phone, although I can be on the phone while walking across the street. Actually, not anymore, but prior to that. It wasn't raining. It wasn't dark. All of those kinds of factors that might contribute to an accident. And yet this just happened. So what I've chosen to do with that in my life, and also, for instance, getting a bad diagnosis, which has happened, is to say, what's the opportunity here? So it's not just to question whether I made it happen or whether it was supposed to happen to me, but rather it happened. Okay. Fact, it happened. Now what? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What am I going to do with this? Which I think is a more productive line of questioning than to say, is it fated or not fated? It's more like, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? How do I become a better person with this new situation that has just landed in my life?
Well, I can't remember exactly where I saw it. But in one of the pieces that I read about fate, I did read that the thinking is that whether or not free will exists or fate is real, believing in fate can be very good for one's mental health. It's a better way of framing, it's a more positive way of framing life. It makes you feel more connected to the universe, society, etc. And I really agree with that. I've been really trying to have to not just have, but practice more gratitude. So I've just sort of been saying thank you to the world, the universe, God, whatever it is, as often as possible when I happen to notice that something sort of unexpectedly or even expectedly goes my way. And my conscious brain thinks that's so freaking cheesy. And like, why am I standing in my kitchen saying thank you because I actually had one more onion than I thought I did? But it really makes a difference. And I think that
100%.
It's real. It's and it feels very like we were talking about a couple of episodes ago about this. It feels very like manifesty, but it's working.
I want to circle back on the concept in just a minute. We'll be right back after this. When you're feeling gratitude, you're not feeling sorry for yourself. Those are mutually exclusive. So a lot of the poor me that we all do and why me, all that stuff, you can't do that at the same time that you're feeling gratitude. The other thing about it is, where is it written, or where did we ever get an expectation that everything's supposed to go our way? Obviously, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Everything is not supposed to go our way. Life is supposed to be filled with disappointments and challenges and obstacles and all of that. So to be able to feel gratitude, or to even just be aware, I mean, this is what mindfulness is all about, is being aware of what's happening. So if you have one more onion than you thought you had, and now the dish that you're making is going to be better, or you don't have to go to the store to get another onion, or you don't have to figure out how to compensate for the lack of onion. Anyone who doesn't cook thinks we're crazy now to be talking like this about onions, but it's real.
Yeah.
All of that is a moment of, you're controlling your mood by doing that, by feeling gratitude, by noticing something that went well or positive. What you're doing is you're making yourself feel better. And we tell ourselves things all the time. So I'm very interested in this idea that believing in fate is good for one's mental health, because in a sense, what it's doing is saying that I don't have to control everything. So it relieves some of the pressure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point about improving one's mood, that is actually a much bigger and more powerful thing than it might sound. It's not just, giving me an extra spring in my step because I'm going to have more alliums in my stir fry, but it's also my mood. Me being in a good mood I live with 2 little people and a husband, and there are 3 other humans who are going to be impacted by my mood. And even if it's just marginally better, that has the potential to make things better for everybody. So, there's a lot to that. And I also often think that happiness begets more happiness. And so if I can, sometimes when I get going with a little something to improve my mood, then other good things seem to follow. And that is something that's not just good for me, but good for the other people I live with. So I'm curious.
I find that when I remember to say thank you for something, it happened last night. I went to bed early. Fred cleaned up the kitchen, emptied the trash, emptied the recycling, everything. I went into this morning to make my coffee, and the kitchen was sparkling. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that he did it that time. And I appreciate whenever he does it, because it's like starting a new day fresh, and I didn't do it. And so I said something, and then that made him feel appreciated. So he then said something nice back, and the day started on a lovely note.
Good job, Fred, and good job, you guys. Evan and I do this thing where at the end of every night, I may have talked about this on the show. It's cheesy, but it's like, it really helps us. Every night before bed, we share from our respective days, a high, a low. Actually, I always insist that we do the low first because I want to get it out of the way. So we do a low, a high, and a gratitude we have of the other. And I always look forward to giving my gratitude, but I always look forward to getting my gratitude from him every single day. And it's, it's the summer camper in me, but it's so true. Telling people what you appreciate about them has such an impact and really just kicks off
on you and on them.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
absolutely.
like, what is it? Sharing your rose, your thorn, and your bud. So, right. But bud is good too, because bud is that thing that's going to happen or that you see promise of happening.
That is
so
true.
Add a bud in there.
Yes. Bud is another word for marijuana. So you heard it here, folks. You heard it here first. Joanne Green from All the F Word says bud is good.
I did say that, didn't I? It can be.
It can be.
It can also be not good.
That is true.
It can also be not good.
Depends on
will. I don't know if there's an F word for marijuana, but if there is, we will tackle that in an episode. We'll have to think about that.
Fumes, maybe. We'll work on it.
Yeah, something to that effect. But back to fate for just a moment. Another thing people, you mentioned early on about coincidences. And I firmly believe that there really are no coincidences and that things are going on behind the scenes, that there's a lot of energy moving around in the universe. And for instance, I get messages from people who are no longer alive in different ways. Ooh. And is that fate? Does, through dreams or I don't know. When coincidences happen, when you run into somebody just after you were thinking about them, or you run into them because they have some piece of information or connection for you that's going to lead you to something else. Is that fate?
I'll give you one of my favorite examples of fate. So in 1999, I was in this Jewish leadership Israel trip group, and I met. I was growing up in Sonoma County, and I met some kids who were teenagers in Marin County. I was a teenager at the time, and became friends with some of them. Stayed in touch, and then in 2010 or something, I was at a party for this tech guy that I knew named Jordan. I only kind of knew him. And I started chatting with this guy named Danny, and we sort of put together that we knew who the other one was. And I said, oh yeah, no, I think we know some of the same people. We stayed sort of like loosely connected. He dated one of my friends years later. And then his mom, AKA you, and I were just sort of tangentially connected for a long time. And then finally met, and look at this. We've recorded I think it's this is our 26th podcast episode. So
yeah, maybe more. And you moved into my neighborhood. Lots of crazy things.
It's true. Oh, plus, and then it turns out, oh, by the way, we went to the same college,
right.
There's, and I wonder
as theater majors.
And we're theater majors. Exactly. I wonder if, it's like on one hand, you could say, well, these are all just little coincidences. Who cares? And it could just be that we go looking because of the kinds of people we are. We go looking for coincidences like that, but they really hold meaning for me. And, maybe that's kind of what that article that I can't remember, but I will for sure link specifically to in the show notes, that says that it's good for your mental health. Because I feel happy thinking about the idea that the universe kind of intended for us to connect,
So then it begs the question, were we connected in a past life?
Yeah.
Is this just one more time that we are brought together in this lifetime? Maybe I was your daughter, or maybe I was your grandchild. I don't know. I'm making all these things up, but who knows? Is there something that's bringing us together again? And is that all part of what's happening with our souls.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think about that kind of thing a lot. Certainly, the idea of past lives is not something that's specific to Judaism, but it really resonates for me as a concept. Or I don't know, maybe is there anything about past lives? Tell me.
So it's fascinating. I looked into this at one point. I became very interested in all this when trans channels were happening and people were getting readings on past lives and all that. And I asked my then rabbi, who had a phenomenal answer. It's like, we don't know. We don't know. And I love it when Judaism in particular, but really anybody and anything says, I don't know, because we don't have proof. There are things written about it that would indicate that we do believe in it. And there are things written in our ancient texts that would make a case for not believing in it. So like so many things, just today I was reading, what does Judaism say about abortion? Well, it depends on what you read and who you ask and what, so I love ambiguity. I think it really leaves a lot of room for interpretation and for making one's reality or one's notion of what is true can evolve over time, because thinking evolves over time and what we know evolves over time. And for instance, the neuroscience that you were referencing early in this episode was not known to people thousands of years ago. And I believe in science. And so when we absolutely have factual evidence of what is going on in our brains, that to me is indisputable. But the rest of it's very fuzzy, I think.
It makes me think a lot about the way my husband's relationship with keeping kosher. So Evan keeps kosher, and it's interesting talking to him about it because he's really not like our kitchen is only as kosher as it is because I'm the one who is running it, and I'm kind of like, well, if we're gonna keep kosher, then I need to like know where the separate dishes are. I need to label, the different things and all that. I think if he were doing it by himself, it would be kosher in intention, but maybe not actually in action.
Not so much in reality.
Yeah. So, but if you ask him about it, he really, because he'll eat in restaurants and he won't eat treif. But for him, he does insist.
Explain what treif is.
Treif. Good call. Treif is a general, I think it's a Yiddish word for non-kosher food. And usually it's used to refer to things like pork and shellfish. But for some people, it's just like specifically kosher produced foods, which have something called a hechsher on it. And a hechsher is the little mark that shows, like on the packaging, that shows that a rabbi has supervised, a special kind of rabbi has supervised the production of the food. So we only buy hechsher.
Someone may roll their eyes at this.
But that's okay. And in fact, Evan rolls his eyes at it. This is kind of where I was getting at. When you were saying, there are undisputed things and you believe in science, he doesn't think that there's anything special and magical about keeping kosher, but it makes him feel closer to he didn't even grow up keeping kosher, but it makes him feel closer to his sort of, his Jewish identity. And it's a thing he does that he thinks is probably kind of silly, but it's important to him and he does it anyway. And it makes me think a lot about the way that I sometimes choose to frame something around the idea of fate or control of the universe somehow, or, because if you really think about it, the idea that I'm somehow blessed and there are people starving in all kinds of places or suffering in terrible ways doesn't make any sense. And I can't make sense of it. And deciding but I still feel like I have to, if I'm going to be so blessed, I have to find meaning in how blessed I am, and I have to do something with it. I have to hold both. So
I think we make choices every day. We make choices to make ourselves feel better, and in some cases to make ourselves feel holy or special. And so I think when someone chooses to observe the tenets of their religion, whatever that is, praying 5 times a day for Muslims, eating fish on Friday for Catholics, refraining from mixing milk and meat for Evan and many other Jews, that is a way of sanctifying the act of eating or the act of how we spend our time. And that makes us feel better. And heck, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, which of course it doesn't, we should, do that. Like if there are things you can do that make you feel special or holy, yay, go right ahead and do them. I think it circles back to the fact that so little really is in our control. Precious little. We tend to get all puffed up and think that we can really control everything. But I can say that the longer I've lived, the more I've seen that shit happens. I mean, things happen to you. And what you get to control is how you respond to it. You don't necessarily get to control what happens. And like everything else in life, I think this notion of fate and the role that it plays in our life is something that we need to view with a sense of balance.
Yeah, I think I really tend to agree with you.
Thanks so much for listening to our episode today. All the F words can be found anywhere you get your podcasts. And we haven't gotten any reviews or ratings in a while. So please, if you like the show, take a minute or two and review us and give us a few stars. 5 would be ideal.
Yeah, five would be good. And you can also hang out with us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at All the F Words Pod, or you can email us at allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye.